going to spend 15-20 minutes talking a bit about what I think is the next immediate evolution of data management, which is going to be into the world of AI, and specifically around personal AI, and what that's going to mean for consumers, for digital trust. But before we jump into that, maybe we'll each introduce ourselves so you understand where we're coming from, and then we'll dive into a bit about some of the risks and opportunities that AI presents in the world of personal data. So, Singe, do you want to go first?
So I'm Singe Deakins, DataSapien. I've spent the last 10 years actually with a company called CitizenMe. I've been doing innovative digital kind of build-outs for about 25 years, kind of going back to British Airways and things, putting them online years and years ago. The big thing for CitizenMe basically spent the last 10 years doing is actually building out a personal AI service, a personal data vault company. We've kind of effectively had an R&D service with 3 pivots through that period. The big thing that we've seen over the last couple of years is large consumer businesses, especially in the States, with maybe 100 million customers, actually asking for the technology to enable this stuff to happen. So there's been a massive change, and kind of many of us were kind of a little bit too early with this space. But the driver for that is basically kind of is not just kind of consumer perception; it's also kind of regulatory driven. There are also kind of market dynamics which are driving this change. So the marketplace and the ecosystem is changing very, very rapidly now. DataSapien is actually about providing the tool sets for big consumer businesses to embed this technology into their own existing customer apps, and we're building that at the moment. So, go on.
Awesome. Just sense checking my mic. So my name is Markus Lampinen. I am the CEO of Prifina. My own background is I'm a data nerd. I think that many of us here in the room are. So I've always been fascinated by what we can actually do with our data. I've been so fascinated that I started 2 data companies in the past. One in content rights and the other one in financial data. I sold both of those. I've invested in a bunch of different nerds like me. I'm based in Silicon Valley. And I've learned a lot. Sometimes made some money and sometimes lost some money, but that's what a hobby is. What Prifina is a consumer-focused data and AI company. And we have this very simple mantra that we all want our personal AI, but the only way that we can actually get the AI to work for us is that we need to control the data. So that's what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Markus. And by way of background, I've been on a similar journey to Michael, I think, kind of trying to... Oh, thank you. There we go. Is that microphone working? Can you hear me okay? I've been on a similar journey to Michael for the last 15 or so years, trying to answer the question, let's assume individuals will have control over their data, then what? Okay, so who cares? Why will individuals use it? What's the commercial model? How does it fit in with policy? So I've been consulting and advising in this space for 15 years and joined a digital wallet company around 2017-18 called Evernym. That got bought by Norton. And so I've kind of done product side, commercial side, and advisory, working with big banks and telcos, trying to look at this problem from multiple different angles. So I think, you know, the bringing today's conversation into, you know, what's going to happen immediately next is this whole, you know, we talked about telco data and personal data and identity information being used for fraud and for improved onboarding and so on. But once it enters this new kind of really challenging world around AI, we have questions about where the data is and how it's being trained and did we get consent, and, you know, maybe Singe, we start with you. You know, how do you see this collision of AI and personal data, and, you know, how do you think about the services that will emerge and how we might describe that new world?
And that is a great question. I'm sure everyone saw this morning about Scarlett Johansson and kind of AI, and we just probably hit the Daily Mail and kind of various tabloids in the UK, and kind of there's a obviously kind of a massive hype around AI at the moment. But I think in terms of the first step, as we just mentioned, is actually kind of enabling people to gather their data and have that data structured up in a way that's understandable. And then in terms of the AI you lay on top of it, our philosophy is you start off with the obvious, straightforward, predictable stuff. So we start off with deterministic algorithms. We then move into probabilistic, where we can provide accuracy scores, and then we're moving into generative. The reason we're doing it that way is because we're actually deploying this stuff live at the moment. And if you're a big company, you don't want to be deploying AIs into a customer app with 100 million customers which may hallucinate, kind of 20% chance it may hallucinate on things like pricing plans or on kind of recommendations for things like health outcomes. So we're layering these kind of 3 different types of intelligence on top of that data, and progressively kind of rolling that out into customer applications. And that basically means that from a customer point of view, and through that process, because we're focused on the jobs that customers need done and on the user experience, it means that you don't even need to talk about AI with the end customers. It's all about doing the outcomes better for those customers and empowering them with their own data to be able to participate. So our approach is very much Horizon 1. We're rolling stuff out over the next kind of 12, 18 months. And then we're looking at generative AI as something that will come through after that. Most of the big companies that we're working with have the same sort of approach to it.
Thank you. Markus, how do you kind of overlay AI into the work you've been doing, around personal data and access and control?
As I've been kind of listening to all of you talk during the day, then I think one of the interesting perspectives that I can bring is that I run a consumer business at the end of the day. And you guys all know essentially consumers nowadays that we talk about them having the attention span of a mouse and so on and so forth. But the reality is that they don't even have that. Like, it's land on the site. If they get it, fantastic, you're in the game. If they don't, they're out. It's as simple as that. So you get a second, if even that. That means that all of these different things, they have to generate value right away for the consumer. They have to understand what's going on. They have to understand what's in it for them. Michael talked about trust. That's a fantastic point. And I think as it comes to AI, and I mean, we have, I love the fact that Michael showed his own AI and the fact that you can talk to his dissertation. I mean, that's super cool. And the fact that he got to upstage me is also fantastic. But that's a really, really simple use case where essentially what we've noticed is that when people use that, they're essentially getting an AI to represent them publicly somewhere where they want. Why would they do that? Well, first of all, it makes them look really good. And the second, it makes them money. And it's as simple as that. If they can see a path to it making money for them, that will just essentially get them on board right away. And the conversion percentage for this product, so the fact that you can have an AI that represents you in public, it's about 40%. So that means that in a second, or maybe I'm being a little bit extreme, let's say in 10 seconds, you can convert 40% of the people that land on something like that are in the right target audience, to actually saying that, hey, I want my own. I think that's one part. But I think in AI, it's unfair to talk about just one type of AI, because I kind of think about it, and I've started to think about it much more as like the friends and the social circles that we have. So you don't just have one friend that you would call on for everything. You also have professionals like doctors and tax attorneys and whatnot. I think AI is going to essentially bridge the gap between all of these. And we're going to have essentially your own AI or the other person's AI in between all of those interactions. And that's why essentially when Michael was saying that the future is here today, that's very much where we are. And I don't think that we have a year. I think we have months in terms of before we'll actually get into these types of interactions practically everywhere. But I kind of like to segment the AIs into 2 parts. Ones are those that essentially work for you and face outward, so they represent you. And the other ones are those that work just for you, especially from a consumer point of view. And all of the vendors, the ecosystem, they will have their own AIs, but especially for you, you'll have those that essentially work for you and meet other people, and then you'll have those that are just for you. And those are the ones that need to be absolutely private.
Very, very interesting. And I think one of the questions I get asked a lot about, and thinking about the 2 perspectives you just shared just now, is who's running that AI? Because now that essentially these models can process vast amounts of data so very, very quickly in a way that wasn't possible before, they're going to know things about ourselves if we give them the right frameworks and the right levels of data and the right inputs, they're going to be able to infer things about ourselves, make recommendations that we didn't know about ourselves. And so you talked about a segment, Markus, right? There's 40% going to sign up. Firstly, could you tell us a little bit more about those segments that are more interested, more likely to convert? And secondly, how those segments, if you've got that insight, are thinking about not just privacy, but where and who's running that AI for them. Is it really theirs and sovereign and they can move it around, or is it run by a large telco or a large big tech that is providing these insights to them?
That's a fantastic question. And just to kind of stay on the macros here, I mean, 40% or 38% conversion. If any of you have worked in advertising, I mean, that's huge. Because, I mean, a lot of people drop because of reasons that are absolutely, like they clicked the wrong thing. So that's just like, that's a fantastic metric. And the number one segment for essentially the one that, that product that we saw, where you can talk to my AI, the number one segment looks roughly like this. It's women. It's women in executive leadership positions, and people that actually are often on stage or essentially in front of an audience. We have different theories for why it's women. First of all, I mean, we absolutely love the fact that we've got that segment. It's like 80% women. Our speculation is that men and women differ slightly when they're on stage, whereas, my gender, we're overconfident and underprepared. And if you think about women, women are the opposite. What is the first thing that when you're actually creating one of these AIs that you'll have to do? You'll have to come up with material. Like, you'll have to make sure that you can teach this AI something. And if everybody's super excited, like, I want one, and then we ask the guys and then we ask the girls that, well, where's your material? And the guys are like, what do I do? And then the girls are like, well, here it is. They've got everything ready to go. So that's one theory that we've got, that they're just better organized. And our data seems to support that. There's a couple other reasons why essentially they're in leadership positions. One of those is that people in leadership positions, they know the AI policy of their employer, and they have confidence that they can actually use this tool. People that are slightly in the middle, they get very ambivalent. Like, can I actually use this? How is my boss going to react? And so on and so forth. Interestingly, the questions that come up is really around how do I train it? And technically, we're not training it, but we use the terminology of teaching it and it learning. That's the first one. Second one is how much does it cost? And cost, we use a $50 a month pricing model and 10% of what it makes you. And the actually focus when they go through that question is that, holy shit, it can actually make me money, which is a really interesting thought.
How much money does it make them?
That depends what they're using it for. The main segment is effectively...
range or?
I mean, it depends on the person, but the main segment is somebody that has subjective expertise that they share on stage or via books or publications or dissertations like Michael's. And then they might charge for it in a number of different ways. One is you might book them for consulting. You might book them for speaking engagements. You might buy their book, And depending on that, then the pricing will vary a lot. It is also very early days. So, I mean, this is something that most people they only realize that it can actually make them money. And it's a thought that they literally have the first time.
So you built out, it sounds like an extension of a thought leadership tool.
Yeah.
So if I'm a senior executive, I can set up a chatbot that represents me. I don't have to do any of the interaction.
Correct.
People can kind of, like we've set up kind of RAG out for our company. We've got a kind of a personal AI, etc. So you've set up the same sort of thing. And for them, basically, then becomes an interaction tool, so they can then use their attention elsewhere.
That's right.
Which is high value.
And it's also very different when you're talking to a consumer versus a company.
Yeah.
Because when you go to a consumer, you say that, hey, we've got this tool, do you want it? They're like, yes. And then they're using it the next day. And then they're on stage the next week. We have one investor who runs machine learning for one of the big finance companies, and they've been working on a financial advisor for the last 13 months. And it's always humbling when I sit with her, and she's like, we've done this thing and this thing and this thing. And I'm like, your stuff is 100% better than what I've got. But do you want one? I can create one right away. And she's like, well, my company's not going to go for that. And the company's not going to go for that for all the reasons that you mentioned, that it hallucinates. Hallucinate is actually, it's a feature, it's not a problem. But the problem is that the enterprise can't accept something that is not 100% correct or 100% predictable. So our model is like 80% there. And it's fine if you're not giving medical advice. It's fine if you're not consulting on taxes. And it's fine if it's a person, their individual subjective choice and knowledge that's actually getting represented. Obviously, there's disclaimers and such, but I mean, like you said, you don't go to the doctor and say that, okay, well, there's a 20%, variation margin here that it might go this way or might go that way.
It does sound like there's an interesting split between the AI that's external facing, where there's more risk and social capital and recommendations and so on, versus the internal one that's helping you make sense and
Sure.
of your life.
Sure. I was just going to ask you, actually, for everyone in the audience, can you put your hands up if you've used some sort of AI, OpenAI or something?
So I would say that's nearly 100%.
Yeah. So we're not a typical audience, I guess we can say, right? Has everyone heard of RAG, things like that? So personally training, a few, okay.
10% maybe.
Okay. So the fascinating thing when you're talking about kind of hallucinations, for things like, so we're working on things like recipe compilation, right? So you got 5 items in your basket, and you want to basically have a meal plan for the rest of the week, and you can automatically come up with creative ideas because you're generating ideas, which is fantastic. In other areas where I'm looking at kind of 5 flights to Istanbul next week, I kind of want to make sure that's the right flight and it's going to turn up, right? So there are some areas where they're really, the creativity is a wonderful thing, and others where we need some other kind of interactions and kind of some proofs, which is kind of more deliberative, where we can kind of get to the 100% accurate kind of outcome. When we get to personal AI, I feel like I'm kind of a naysayer here, but I completely believe in the vision, kind of second horizon on, where personal AIs are going to be a complete thing in all our lives, and it's going to happen quite quickly. It's just in the short term, we have kind of a lot of things to work out. And the big thing for me is how do you get to mass scale? I mean, we talk about kind of online shopping, for example, 80% of people still buy in the supermarket, right? So in terms of kind of mass diffusion, we need some big companies to be doing this quite quickly. My concern is it's going to be kind of Apple and Google who do it very quickly. We heard earlier about wallets. They're going to add payments in. They're already developing kind of generative AI on devices. Apple already has stuff under the hood. We just don't talk about it. So we're going to have potentially a couple of players which become our kind of god AIs, which we probably don't want as a society. So the question for me is how we get from here to mass adoption in as democratic way as possible, if you like, in the next 18, 24 months.
So maybe that's a really good way to kind of round out the session. What are the barriers, do you think, to adoption? And I'm super interested that the conversation's been much more about utility. It's not about privacy or worry about control. A little bit about digital trust. But Markus, you mentioned, in the enterprise, if I've got a policy internally, then I'm kind of happy to use it because we've got a framework and we know what happens if it goes wrong, whatever. So maybe just a couple of thoughts briefly on, or maybe just one. What do you think is the biggest barrier to consumer adoption of personal AI? Markus, maybe we'll start with you.
I think really it is utility. I mean, on a consumer side, it is utility. On the enterprise side, it's probably slightly different, slightly more nuanced by their own internal workings. But for consumers, it's definitely utility. And I don't think there's anything that will stop that. Like, it's interesting kind of sitting in this petri dish in Silicon Valley where, you mentioned that 20% only order groceries online. It's like 100% there. Because, why would you go to a store if you don't need to? Yeah. And then they'll do farmers markets and whatnot for the stuff that they want to do. One thing that I haven't been able to get rid of is going to the, the petrol station for my other car. The other one is an electric Mini, and I love that thing because you don't have to go to the petrol station. But the interesting thing there is that the adoption of AI in most things consumer-facing, it's pretty total. I mean, we don't write code anymore without AI checking it. We don't check for syntax by developer time. We don't do any of that, because why would you? And I think this is kind of the thing that once it rolls out into every single part of your life, which might take a while, but the question isn't really when does it get to 100%. The question is when does it get to a tipping point where the consumer is like, oh crap, this thing isn't using it, I'm not going to touch that. And the tipping point might actually come very, very quickly, where essentially the consumers find one thing where their routine is just so different, then they start extrapolating into everything else, and they find everything else inferior, and then everybody has to catch up.
So it's about utility, and then that tipping point where it's better with than without. Singe, brief.
It's the jobs that you're trying to do for your customers. So we've got, as I say, kind of you have lots of brands you interact with that you trust to get jobs done for you, and it's about expediting and making those jobs more efficient as the next wave is what I think. As we do that and people become confident and comfortable with those kind of algorithmic outcomes, we then move into kind of mass adoption of personal AI, because you then have effectively mass education, not through preaching about AI, but of people just getting things done much more easily and more efficiently.
I think from the work we've been doing at Mission, which is the kind of consultancy we've put together to really focus on, there's a track here on empowerment tech. This is tooling that helps the individual either make sense of their own lives or present themselves to the outside world. You know, that focus on value is really where, you know, enterprises are having the conversation, startups saying, what is the use case that's going to tip individuals over, and where is AI going to get to the point where with AI is better? And we need those guardrails. We need to understand the digital trust, but we also need to understand how it's going to be used and what happens when it goes wrong because of the 20% hallucination.
Yeah.
With that, we'll wrap up, and I must mention there's drinks after the MEF event, but there's also going to be after event. So I write a newsletter called customerfutures.com, and we're going to be having some drinks over the road at Somerset House. It was going to be sunny, but we're going to be on the river bar, hiding under the rain. But if you want to join us, please come over in about 15, 20 minutes, or after the MEF drinks.
45 minutes.
45 minutes after the MEF drinks.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Anyway, thanks so much, and thank you, Singe and Markus.
Perfect. All right. All right, and that